folks, hope you're all safe. So today's recipe is going to be brown lentil with roasted butternut squash linguine. It's another really cheap one, but full of so much flavour. It's bursting out of the flavour with the roasted butternut squash with the brown lentils. There's so many different tones going on. It's a lovely one. It's dirt cheap. It's dead easy. Again, right in my wheelhouse, cheap and easy. So let's crack on. Let's do this. So the very first thing we're looking to do is to measure out 110 grams of dried brown lentils, or half a cup. Now you could use other lentils if you wanted, red or green lentils, but the brown lentils give a fantastic earthy flavour to this dish, so it's the ones I would recommend over any others. And once measured out, it is important to just rinse your lentils for about 30 seconds to take that dusty nature off them. You don't want that on them, so clear that off just in a sieve for 30 seconds, that's all. And transfer your lentils into a container which you'll be able to add them to your water just shortly. Now for some reason I put them in my pot, then put them in a bowl here. I don't know what I was thinking, but transfer them over to a bowl so that we can add them to our water shortly. And now bring a medium small pot of water to the boil, filled about a third of the way up is more than enough. And once at the boil, we're going to add our lentils. Be sure to have salted your water as well. Once at the boil and our lentils are added, reduce the heat to low, cover them and then continue to cook for 45 minutes. And now that our lentils are cooking, we can prepare our butternut squash. We're looking to peel a medium sort of large butternut squash. We certainly don't want a small one for this dish. And once it's peeled, we're going to top and tail it, which means remove the top, remove the bottom. And once top and tailed, we need to half our butternut squash, which means on its largest flat end, stand it vertically and cut down through it. You need a good, solid, heavy, sharp knife to do this. If your knife's blunt, it won't do the job. And then using a dinner spoon / soup spoon, we're going to scoop out the seeds and any of the fibrous parts inside it. You need to go in quite firm here to remove all the fibrous parts. The seeds come out a bit easier, but they still take a bit of effort because they really can be welded to all the fibrous parts. And if you need to, just scrape around with the inside of your spoon as well. And now with a very sharp and long enough knife, we're going to cut lengthways, spacing about 1 centimetre apart, as we see here. Now, I do like to start in the centre and then from there make my other cuts, which is normally 3 cuts, maybe 2 cuts, just depending on the size of your butternut squash. But as you can see, about 1 centimetre apart is what we're looking for. And once our lengthways cuts are finished, turn our knife 90 degrees perpendicular to where we were cutting, and again cut roughly 1 centimetre apart. And this will give us lovely sized chunks for putting into the oven. And once fully cut, take and spread them onto a silicone lined baking tray. Depending on the size of the butternut squash you've went and purchased, you may need 2 trays, you may get away with 1 depending on the size of the tray and the size of the butternut squash. Most times I get it on 1, sometimes I need 2. And repeat the process with the other half. Start in the centre, centimetre cuts to get our chunk sizes. And transfer the other half onto your baking tray. And from here, after spreading it evenly across the tray, lightly spray across all the chunks with some cooking oil. Try and make sure they're all covered. And then grab a salt grinder and generously grind across all the chunks so you can see those lovely salt crystals sitting across them. And same goes for our pepper. We're looking for a lovely generous coating of pepper spread across. And then into the oven at 200 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. And whilst our butternut squash chunks are in the oven, we can get on and prepare our onion. Now I say this about around this time in many of my videos, but I do aim my process to show everything as if you're a novice, so hence why I'm covering here how to deskin and how to chop your onion. So First of all, you want to remove the top, then you want to half it, and then you want to peel the skin off before we proceed with the chopping. And to chop the onion, you cut towards the root end, but you don't cut all the way through. Leave a very, very small amount attached. We're looking to be roughly chopped so the spacing can be reasonably far apart, and then we turn it 90 degrees and we chop down, and that's how we chop our onion. The thinner the spacing, the finer the chopping. And once chopped, transfer your onions over to a bowl until required. Ideally cover them to protect your eyes, to stop the fumes coming up and stinging them. My cover of preference are silicone liners, but a cloth, a kitchen towel, anything will do just to stop those fumes rising. And next up, we want to prepare our garlic. We're looking for 6 cloves, which sounds a lot, but this dish needs it, which would either be 1.5 blocks, 6 cloves are frozen, or 6 cloves are fresh. The blocks of crushed garlic are great, but fresh is always better. And to our ramekin, we're now adding 2 teaspoons of sage. And to the same ramekin, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of table salt, followed by half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. And we need 225 millimeters of stock. As I use OXO cubes, that would mean 2 OXO cubes, as 1 cube stretches out to 180, 190 milliliters of water. Forgot the exact volume now, but suffice to say, it means we need 2. And 1 can of chopped tomatoes. You don't need to take them out of the can, just prepare your can so you're ready. And once your butternut squash is about halfway through cooking, remove it from the oven and try and turn all the chunks over. Yes, you're not going to get them all turned over, but aim with a slice to flip most of them. You'll see the black pepper disappearing, which will give you the idea of what's been flipped over and what's not been flipped over. So that's a good visual cue that you can use, but don't be too particular. Aim for getting most of them. There'll be a couple of stubborn chunks that didn't flip as you tried to get them all over. And once you're happy, back into the oven for the remaining time. And now it's a case of waiting until the butternut squash is ready, but once the full 30 minutes is up, once you've had equal cooking time for both sides, bring them out of the oven. And being careful not to burn yourself, transfer them into a bowl and set them aside until we require them a little bit later in the dish. And by about this stage, the brown lentils should also be about ready. So we're going to take our brown lentils and we're going to drain them in a colander in the sink just to remove all the water. And once drained, they can also be set aside in a bowl until they are required for their stage of the dish as well. And now we can get on with the main stage of the cooking. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil to a large non-stick saute pan or something similar in nature. And at the same time, we need a pan for our pasta, so prepare a large pan of water, add some salt and bring to the boil for our linguine. And also add a tiny splash of olive oil. And whilst our pan of water is heating, we also want to bring our saute pan up to a medium heat. And once at temperature, we're going to add our onion, gently mix it around just to give it a coating of oil, and then we're going to cover it with a lid and cook it for 5 minutes. If you're unsure as to whether your oil has reached temperature or not, put a couple of chunks in, and if it sizzles, the oil's at temperature and you can put the full amount in. And a couple of minutes through cooking the onions, we also want to start cooking our pasta. So pasta goes in and we're going to cook that for 10 minutes. 12 minutes if you want a softer mouthfeel, but I prefer al dente, so 10 minutes for me. Now early on, whilst our pasta is still beginning to soften, go in with your tongs just to move it about and break it up, just so you don't end up with any stuck pieces of pasta together which end up really, really firm and hard. So in early with the tongs to break it apart. And after letting our onions sweat for 5 minutes, we're going to add our garlic and we're going to cook that until fragrant. Anywhere between 15 to 45 seconds and you start smelling the garlic coming off. Once we've got the garlic smell coming off, we quickly move on to the next stage. And that next stage being, we're going to add every other ingredient we're left except our butternut squash. So chopped tomatoes, sage, salt, black pepper, vegetable stock and the browned lentils. And then we're going to stir everything together and simmer for about 5 minutes. And don't forget your pasta. Jump back in with the tongs, make sure it's not clumping, lift it up out of the water and gently drop it back in just to make sure there's no clumping happening. And once our 5 minutes is up, we're going to go in with a stick blender. Because it's a non-stick pan, make sure it's a plastic head or you could ruin your non-stick, and we're going to lightly cream the sauce. It depends on how far you want to go with this. You can cream it entirely. In fact, you could transfer it to a jug blender and do it that way and put it back in if you want it entirely smooth, or you can leave it slightly rustic. It just depends on the way you want it. Depends on the way I want it. I sometimes really cream it, other times I leave it more rustic. It does actually, that mouthfeel, make it feel like a slightly different dish as well, so it's worth playing with and seeing the way you prefer it. And whichever way you go with the blending, once you have it to your satisfaction, we're going to add our butternut squash chunks and we're going to cook until it's warmed through. It should only take a few minutes at the very most and to get those chunks nicely warmed up. And whilst they are warming, our pasta should now be ready, so we're going to remove that from the hob and drain it and transfer it over to some nice dinner bowls. And that's us. Serve and enjoy. It's a really simple meal to pull together, and if you want to save yourself some time than cooking it all at the one time, prepare your lentils well in advance, prepare your butternut squash well in advance, and then bring them out when you need them. Even if you're going to keep them chilled in the fridge for a day or so, you can prepare them well in advance of actually cooking the main meal. So there we go, brown lentil, roasted butternut squash and linguine. Dead simple, dead cheap. It's a ridiculously cheap meal to make. I'm not going to be too daft and try to eat the pasta at the same time because it will get messy and I don't want it through my beard. Trying to do this and do that on camera, it will go wrong, but here we go. I know I keep saying it, but it's lovely. I say it in all my recipes, but they are lovely. It's a real good warmth going through this one. The hints of the butternut squash, especially after the roasting of it, along with the brown lentils. The brown lentils give you a real earthy taste to it. If you want, you can use green lentils, but you lose that earthy taste and get a peppery taste. And you're already peppered quite heavily, the butternut squash, when you put it onto the roast. So I definitely think the better way is the brown lentil rather than the green lentil. But it's lovely, it's gorgeous. Go make it. Enjoy. Take care, folks. All the best.